Hello and welcome to Network Africa with me, Cynthia Arre. We begin the program with some rather frustrating news. After all the waiting and anticipation for this day to come, an Egyptian court adjourned the trial of two Aljazeera television journalists from today to March the 8th. Mohamed Fahmy and Baher Mohamed are both charged with aiding a terrorist organization and were freed on bail on February the 12th after more than 400 days in jail. Now here's what the Aljazeera journalists had to say after the announcement.
I really don't know what's going to happen. I am paying for my own legal fees. It's become really costly for me, and on every level, emotionally, financially, my whole family is stressed. I enjoyed my first couple of days of freedom, but it's still limited freedom, and I'm still stressed. Last night I didn't sleep much because I'm always thinking about what's going to happen. Is this going to end soon? As I expected, it was adjourned. And again, the same, inefficiencies. The witnesses don't show up. The evidence is not. That's the responsibility of the court. So I don't get it.
What happened today, the adjournment today to the 8th of March is the same. I'm slightly optimistic because of the judgment of the Court of Cassation. I'm still waiting, I wait and see. But I'm happy that I will return back. I will not stay in prison. I'm happy that I'm going back to my family, seeing my family and my kids. I just spoke to my wife and kids now. They were very happy that I'm returning home. This is something very beautiful and I really appreciate. And I'm willing to continue this for freedom of press.
The Aljazeera journalists Baher Mohamed and Mohamed Fahmy will bring you more news concerning the happenings in Egypt, but for now we shift our attention to South Sudan. After the power-sharing deal was signed between the warring sides involved in the conflict, many were optimistic that better for the world's newest country. Unfortunately, that has not been the case, as violence has still sprung up in parts of the country. The latest and most disturbing development coming from the country is the abduction of at least 89 boys in the country, and UNICEF has confirmed that unidentified gunmen went from house to house and seized boys over the age of 12. Just last week, Human Rights Watch accused both sides of using soldiers. That's a charge denied by the government. We'll examine that aspect of child soldiers in a moment, but for now, let's look at how the conflict has affected schooling. The conflict has clearly distorted education, and based on that, the South Sudan President Salva Kiir and UN Children's Agency UNICEF launched the Back to Learning campaign and will reach out of school children in all 10 states, including areas currently engulfed in conflict.
As part of the campaign, UNICEF has partnered with 20 local and international non-governmental organizations and aims to reach 200,000 children in schools and learning spaces in the conflict zones. An additional 200,000 children will be enrolled in 1,000 schools in non-conflict areas, and training will be provided for 4,000 teachers and early childhood development facilitators, as well as 1,500 parent-teacher association members.
Many children are out of school. That is why it is very important that we do our best to bring peace so that our children who have left the schools come back and continue their education.
The fighting in the country has had a devastating impact on children's education. Many have had to flee their homes, and school buildings are either damaged or being used to house the displaced. In her remarks, the head of the UN mission in South Sudan, Elaine Margaret Lodge, said at least 1.4 million school-aged children are out of education.
War has effectively ended learning for some 400,000 children and adolescents across the country, bringing the total number of children out of school to 1.4 million. So this initiative is just a start and a vital necessity.
Before the current emergency, literacy rates in some parts of South Sudan were only 15%, but experts fear the conflict could set education back even further.
Joining us now live from South Sudan is Colonel Africano Mande, who is the acting spokesperson for the South Sudan military. Colonel, thank you so much for speaking with us on Network Africa.
The pleasure is mine.
Now, I'd like to start by asking you about an update concerning the abducted boys. Any word on that?
Well, indeed, there was an unfortunate incident that occurred in the town of Malakal, that is in Upper Nile State. And we got news that came to our headquarters yesterday that there was an unspecified number of children that have been abducted by armed men. And we sent a team over to do an investigation. And also we recalled some of the division commanders and some of the field commanders to come and give an explanation. But what needs to be understood is that, Upper Nile State has a number of ungovernable spaces, and there are quite a number of militia groups that continue to operate in the area. So we suspect that actually one of the militia groups that has not necessarily been integrated in the government within our military establishment might have conducted that act. But we're waiting for feedback from the investigators that have actually gone to the field.
Now, Colonel, we know you're awaiting feedback, but is there a possibility that we're looking at another potential case of a child soldier recruitment?
Well, first of all, it's within our policy that children are not recruited within the military, and we have signed a number of protocols with regards to child soldiers, protection, and recently the Ministry of Defense also signed something to that effect, and the Chief of General Staff also issued a punitive order and distributed to all the commanders in the field to ensure that they do not contravene some of these defense acts and policies. But the bottom line is, as I said, the biggest challenge we're having is that in some of the ungovernable spaces where there's been too much fighting, where there are many armed actors operating in the area, there are still cases of children. So the SPLA, which is the Sudan People Liberation Army, which is the official military of South Sudan, has been working hand in hand with some of the humanitarian actors, some of the organizations such as UNICEF, to ensure that we actually take custody of all the children that are in the hands of militia groups and so forth. So obviously, as a matter of policy, we do not consider that. Besides, our military has more than enough manpower, more than actually required. So there's no reason why we should go out and start recruiting children or anybody to that effect.
Okay, now let's deviate from the issue of the potential child recruitment. What I'd like to ask you at this point is there still tension on the ground in South Sudan?
Well, to begin with, in military terms, I will say that I will comfortably say that there's no credible threat to any town or to any city, so there's no major war that we should expect. But the thing is, there are quite a number of militia groups belonging to the rebels, and I think everybody is very much aware that the political leadership of the rebels do not have absolute control over some of the pockets of rebel groups that they claim to be leading. So because of that, there is no credible threat. So, but that does not mean that there are no skirmishes that may occur here and there. Remember, we have for a long time signed a cessation of hostility agreement with the rebels, and recently the government also signed a recommitment to that cessation of hostility. But unfortunately, out of probably 15 or 20 of the violations, 99% of the violations have been by the rebels themselves. So there's not much tension as such, but the bottom line is there are pockets of rebel groups here and there that are not posing any credible threat, but they continue to abduct children, they continue to attack some of our outposts and so forth, but these are not major threats. So the tension is relatively down, and then the only place that probably may show semblance of tension is areas that are right at the border with the Republic of Sudan. But otherwise, it's just a small part of an area north of Malakal.
Okay, just to summarize everything, based on your experience, Colonel, what would you say is the way forward away from this crisis? Because it looks as though despite the power sharing deal and the peace deals, we're still seeing some degree of tension rising here and there. What would you say is the way forward?
Well, I think, first of all, the way forward is a negotiating process, and then eventually we are looking forward for a settlement. Now, as we're talking now, our political leadership and the representatives of the government are in Addis Ababa negotiating with the rebels under the auspices of the IGAD, which is the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, and also the Troika. So they are negotiating. So the way forward is basically to have a negotiating process in place, and we hope that will be able to bring peace. But what is so challenging is that, to begin with, there is this complete disjuncture between the political leadership of the rebel group in Addis Ababa, and their fighters in the field. So they do not absolutely control their fighters in the field. You might have witnessed recently there is a case of their spokesperson actually defecting and coming back to Juba and denouncing rebellion and saying basically that is a complete confusing state of affairs, and then he doesn't want to be a part of that. So, but the bottom line is, whatever happens, even if there is a disjunction between the political leadership in Addis Ababa and their fighters in the field, the government is still committed to peace process, and that's why all along they have been within the negotiating table and the circle, negotiating with the rebels. So the only way forward is, of course, negotiation. But that does not mean that the South Sudanese military may not take actions when they continue to violate the cessation of hostility. Obviously, all along the South Sudanese military has been on defensive.